What is going on, guys? This is Skyhound, also known as Geek Archivist Xavier Pearce. And I'm actually going to be going over, at least to an extent, a bit of a review and mini analysis of Sonic the Hedgehog 3, which has likely been doing a lot better compared to Disney and their attempt at trying to downplay the success of Sonic financially, considering that there have been a few videos already pointing out that Sonic has literally been mocking the losers over at Disney who are salty that Mufasa is failing financially. Now, before I go on any further, I do want to point out here really fast, besides some spoilers that I'm likely going to mention in this film, I want to be 120% clear. I have never, ever played the Sonic games. Most of them. The only ones that I remember was back in the 90s when most people probably do not know this. You know about Sega Genesis, but I dare you to ask how many know of the handheld known as the Sega Game Gear? Yeah, that's a handheld, by the way. FYI, I recall watching a video about the Sega Game Gear. There is one thing that unfortunately I do remember about this little unit. It was a battery guzzler. It really ate up the power of the batteries. You needed 6 batteries to power this thing. And I unfortunately had trouble playing the Sonic games on that one because, well, besides the controls, it was very simplistic. But I really struggled trying to play those games. But I know there are others who have likely played the Sonic games on the Sega Genesis and have done a lot better than I have. Besides that, you also have the fact that both Sega and Nintendo are both based in Japan. Now, with regards to pop culture, I will mention a few things here. But in terms of, the story itself, I really enjoyed it. Jim Carrey playing double duty as Gerald and Ivo Robotnik. We also have Keanu Reeves, who voices Shadow. Now, for those of you guys, if you watch some videos on YouTube regarding behind the scenes, he does admit that he has never played the games, like myself. And before I go on any further about this film, I also want to give a quick shout out to a few geeks that I do follow. One of them being Orange Hat Reviews. He is a former gamer and he doesn't play as much, now compared to back then. But if I were to ever ask him, knowing him, he has likely played some of the Sonic games, if not most of them. But I will say this, that the only things that I know about Shadow, besides watching some videos online, is mainly from the anime of Sonic X back in the early to mid 2000s. Now, what is clear is that there's a girl by the name of Maria who is actually a good friend of Shadow's. But unfortunately, Shadow's backstory is very tragic. So, some of that I do recall from watching the anime itself. I don't remember the episodes, but there is an arc with regards to Shadow himself. And the thing is that they do make references to some of the games. For those of you guys who know what it is, you likely know which parts they're referencing here. But anyway, the backstory is mentioned a little later, but it starts off with a prison that's over in Japan, and Shadow is actually in stasis. Unfortunately, he does recall back when he was in a military facility, and Gerald Robotnik tries to escape with his granddaughter Maria, as well as Shadow, because some higher ups have ulterior motives for wanting to use Shadow. And Gerald was originally trying to protect him. But unfortunately, an agent accidentally misfires um, a container that contains the chaos energy generated by Shadow, which unfortunately kills Maria. Gerald unfortunately gets imprisoned, and Shadow is then placed in suspended animation. However, when Shadow does escape, he finds out that he's been under suspended animation for 50 years. 2024 minus 50. You do the math. Anyway, we then cut towards Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles having a little bit of friendly competition amongst each other. But Sonic sort of figures out that the whole thing was a ruse after he supposedly loses the race, and he finds out that Knuckles and Tails are actually holograms. So by the time he gets back, he finds out that his adoptive parents, Tom and Maddie, have a bit of an anniversary celebration for Sonic since he arrived on Earth. But eventually that celebration does get cut short as they are then asked by GUN, which stands for Guardian Units of Nations, when Shadow causes a bit of chaos over in Tokyo. But we then find out that Commander Walters explains the story about Shadow, which I sort of did a while ago. But the drones of Robotnik find out where they are. And before I go on any further, I do want to point out here that the chows that are mentioned, they are actually a part of Sonic lore. So throughout this one, they do sprinkle bits and pieces of the games, as well as the other bits of the Sonic universe lore in these films, which they do a good job of, by the way. But when Walters does, get fatally wounded, he gives Sonic a key card and asks him to keep that key card safe. But when they do fight, but prior to Walters dying, they do fight Shadow, and obviously they get their butts kicked. Now, before I go on any further, I am kind of jumping a little bit ahead and kind of like, going around every now and then. There are some pop culture references. One of them I'm about to put in real quick. And if you guys know it, you know it. Okay, so obviously I mentioned a little bit about the Matrix, since Keanu Reeves is the one who voices Shadow. But anyway, back to the main points here. When Sonic, Knuckles, and Tails do fight Shadow, they obviously get their butts kicked. But there are some other references that I do notice. One of them being the fact that they add a little bit of lore. They do mention a bit about the Chow characters. Now, that is, for those of you guys who have played the games, you likely know what those creatures are. But another pop culture, there's a couple pop culture references besides the one that I just cited. One of them being the Akira bike slide from the classic film Akira. FYI, I know my fellow geeks are going to be like, have you even watched it yet? You likely know the answer to that question, but I'll get to it when I get to it. Okay, guys, relax. But the second pop culture reference, and I'll get to the quotes a bit later, some of the stuff that was pretty fun. The second pop culture reference that I did spot was when one of the girls was asking Tails if he was Detective Pikachu. Now, while Idris Elba does voice Knuckles, I do like the jab at Nintendo here. Because for those of us who know the history of the rivalry between Nintendo and Sega, we know that Mario is the mascot and Sonic is the mascot of their respective companies. Now, with that being said, when Sonic, Knuckles, and Tails learn from Commander Walters about Shadow and his past, unfortunately, by the time the story gets finished, they get attacked by the drones that supposedly was sent by Robotnik. But when the three catch up with Agent Stone, they obviously had to ask the question, and Agent Stone points out that wasn't him. So they have to find out what's going on, and obviously they form a bit of an uneasy alliance. Now, what I like when they do go to the facility, they don't realize that not only is Shadow different, but the way how he captures the three, they add a little bit of the horror element in there, just the way how he sneaks up on them unknowingly. But when Tom and Maddie do manage to help out after Shadow gets the key card from him, that's when they realize, okay, we really need to figure out what's going on here. But prior to that, I gotta give kudos to Jim Carrey and his performance doing double duty, because here's another reference that I spotted, and I put it in my review when I was doing this on Criticless. You notice when Sonic sees another Eggman, he's like, there are two Eggmen now? To which Ivo responds, double your villains, double your fun. For those of you guys who know this meaning, you probably heard that jingle so many times. I know I have during my lifetime. That, ladies and gentlemen, is from the Wrigley gum commercial. Double your pleasure, double your fun. Now you know. But anyway, we learn about the Eclipse Cannon and what that key is for. They find out that Gerald gave Gunn, while he was in prison, the schematics for that weapon. Turns out the other key is over at HQ over in London. So there is some really amusing bits, particularly with regards to a remote that causes the reversal of gravity and the like. But unfortunately, when Sonic fails to try to get the key and then Shadow gets it, Knuckles breaks into the facility and actually destroys, messes with the remote, which made things kind of go bad at first. But eventually, we find out that Gerald does betray Ivo, and he practically doesn't consider Ivo family, because when Maria died, Gerald points out to Ivo she was the only family that he had. So, as the two of them are fighting, there is a bit of like a subplot, and fans of the Sonic franchise know the way how they handle the Master Emerald in this point of the film. I get the frustration. I might probably have to ask around about this. But for those who found that point disappointing, I understand your frustration there. But when Shadow does injure Tom, when he actually gets the keycard from him, Sonic is really upset when he asks him, "What did you do?" And Shadow simply replies, "What I had to." And Knuckles, knowing that Sonic is not in his right mind and he's asking about the Master Emerald, I want to point out here that when you're using something that's really powerful for the wrong reasons, yeah, it's not going to end up well. I'll just put it that way. But when Sonic finds out that Shadow is also able to utilize the Master Emerald. That's when Sonic eventually realizes a lesson that Tom told him earlier, that when you really screw something up, you can't do it alone. So when they realize that they need to stop Robotnik and then, get rid of the Eclipse Cannon, that's when obviously there's some really good lines. I don't quite remember it that well, but um, when Sonic says "gotta go fast," Shadow gives him that odd look where he's like, "Don't tell me you got a catchphrase." And I don't remember the full lines, but I do recall that Sonic tells Shadow that they love it. The fans love it, and obviously Gerald and Ivo do have a bit of a fight of their own inside the canon. And kudos to Jim Carrey for delivering these meta lines because it is so Jim Carrey. And one of them, I recall, it was about Comic Con when Ivo sees the weapon that Gerald is using. Let me just try to pull it up real quick. But there's a few others that I did find. So one of them had to do with like Ryan Reynolds and Green Lantern, considering that that film didn't do so well on DC's end. And then when Ivo gets a hit in though, because he's using the praying mantis, Gerald is using a bit of a scorpion-like weapon. Ivo gets a hit in with one of the claws, and then Gerald's looking at his mustache, and he's like, "Elder abuse." I gotta give credit to Mr. Carey for that. Anyway, I did find out the line between Sonic and Shadow, like right after they go super with the emeralds. So Sonic goes, "Gotta go fast." Shadow replies, "Don't tell me you have a catchphrase." And Sonic's reply is, "That's right, new Hedgehog, and everyone loves it." I will admit that those of you guys who know the game get where this is going. But anyway, Ivo does manage to get the upper hand on Gerald with the help of Tails and Knuckles. But when Knuckles and Tails are trying to save Sonic after he's unable to, push the rest of the Eclipse Cannon from, destroying the Earth, that's where Shadow steps in. And then obviously Ivo has to assist on that. But in the process, unfortunately, they do hit the moon. With that being said, I did kind of speed through this as quickly as I could. But overall, I will say that the lack of human focus was good and more focus on the main characters. I like it to an extent, but in terms of character lore and all of that, it's a hit and miss. But for fans of Sonic, you're likely going to say it's a miss, and I wouldn't put it against you. However, I will say that there are two post credits. The second one is a lot shorter than the first, but they do reference two characters. One of them is Metal Sonic. The second one, I find out, is Amy, but Sonic doesn't know who she is yet. All he knows is that there's another hedgehog, has a hammer, and it's pink. I will say that I do know there is a movie regarding Metal Sonic, but that's about it. So overall, if I had to give a rating, I'd give this at least maybe objectively 7 out of 10. But as a moviegoer and a bit of a gamer and a geek, I'd give this an 8. Now, as for the second post credit, it is shorter. I find out later as I went through YouTube, Shadow survives the destruction of the Eclipse Cannon after the core melted down. How is it obvious? If you recognize the rocket boots that he wears and then the gold cuffs from the gloves, you know it belongs to him. With that being said, this has been Skyhound, also known as Geek Archivist Xavier Pearce. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Give a like and subscribe for more videos. Stay safe, stay sane, and as my good friend Orange Chat would say, stay humble. Peace.